talk about the beautiful business of milk today. Yeah, yeah. I got milk. Let's talk about milk. Oh yeah, baby, let's talk about the beautiful business of milk today.
This episode of Got Milk is sponsored by Shunya Agritech, the folks revolutionizing cattle nutrition with hydroponic green fodder. Visit their website at shunya.live for more details or download the Shunya app from Play Store or App Store.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive on climate change in Uttar Pradesh, India.
Sounds interesting.
It is. We're going to be looking at the Uttar Pradesh State Action Plan on Climate Change 2.0.
Okay.
So it's a pretty in-depth report, but I think we can pull out some really interesting stuff.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So if you're prepping for a meeting or you just, want to get up to speed
Right.
on climate change in Uttar Pradesh, then this is the place for you.
Definitely.
So first things first, can you kind of set the stage for us? What's the deal with Uttar Pradesh? Like, why is this place so important?
Uttar Pradesh. Well, it's the most populous state in India.
Okay.
Yeah, almost 200 million people. That's more than most countries in the world.
Wow, okay.
It's a major agricultural producer for the country, and its industries are rapidly growing. But it also faces some social and economic challenges.
Okay.
For instance, literacy rates are still relatively low.
I see.
So there's a lot of potential for development there.
Yeah. So it's crucial to India's economy.
Yeah.
But it also has a lot of kind of internal challenges it's facing.
Yes,
So that kind of makes understanding the climate change impact even more important, right?
Exactly, and that's what this report really dives into.
Okay.
It looks at climate data from 1980 to 2019.
Okay.
And I think what's really fascinating is how even seemingly small changes in temperature can have a really big impact.
Yeah.
We're talking agriculture, water resources, even human health. All these things are really sensitive to even slight shifts in climate.
Yeah. The report mentions this increase, like 0.0074 degrees Celsius for the average annual maximum.
Right.
I wouldn't think that's a big deal, but I guess over time it does make a difference.
It really adds up. These seemingly small increases can affect things like crop yields,
Right.
water availability, heat stress, and then there's the rainfall data. The report shows a decrease of about 6.7 millimeters annually. But here's the thing. The monsoon season, which is absolutely vital for agriculture in Uttar Pradesh, saw a rainfall decline of about 5.83 millimeters.
Wow. So, it's already a pretty dry place, and now we're talking about less rain.
Right.
And it's making me think of those articles about water shortages in other parts of India.
Yeah.
Is Uttar Pradesh, are they headed in the same direction?
It's a really valid concern, and that's where the report's vulnerability assessments come in. It breaks down how susceptible different sectors are to these climate shifts.
Okay.
And it's pretty eye-opening how interconnected it all is.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's get into these vulnerabilities. What sectors are we talking about here, and how bad is it?
So the report highlights agriculture, water resources, forestry, human health, and even disaster management
Oh, well.
as being highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change.
Let's start with agriculture, I think. We've talked
Yeah.
about the rainfall issue, but what else makes this sector so vulnerable?
You're right, less rain is a big factor. But it's not just that. It's their dependence on rain-fed agriculture, the lack of access to things like modern farming techniques and information.
Okay.
Then you've got things like stray cattle impacting farmland, and even things like land fragmentation and
Right.
food security concerns make the situation even more complex.
Yeah, so it really is like a whole bunch of problems coming together.
It is. It's like each problem just makes the other problems worse.
Exactly.
The report actually dives into district-level data showing that rainfall isn't just declining overall.
Right.
It's also becoming more and more unpredictable. For example, Maharashtraganj receives the most rain annually,
Okay.
but Kushinagar has seen the sharpest decrease over time.
Huh. So you have these areas where it's not just less rain, but also less predictable rain.
Exactly.
And must make it so hard for farmers to plan.
Absolutely. And then you have water resources.
Okay.
Uttar Pradesh, believe it or not, has the biggest share of replenishable groundwater in all of India.
Wow, okay, that sounds good.
You would think that's good, right? But they're actually drawing it out faster than it can be replenished.
Huh. So it's like you can be rich in resources but poor in management.
Perfect way to put it. And the numbers are really striking.
Okay.
Out of 830 assessment units, a full 91 of those are classified as overexploited.
Oh, wow.
You combine that with decreasing rainfall and rising temperatures, and you've got a recipe for some serious water stress.
Yeah, so it's amazing how even something that's abundant can become a problem without proper management.
It really is, and climate change just amplifies these existing issues.
Yeah. All right. So agriculture, water, both in a tough spot.
Definitely.
What about the forests? What's going on with the forests?
So the report identifies forest fires, fragmentation, and of course those rising temperatures as major drivers of vulnerability.
Okay.
It's impacting the health of the forests, the biodiversity, even making them more susceptible to things like invasive species. And get this, the report projects that under future climate scenarios, over 8,500 square kilometers could become climate hotspots.
8,500 square kilometers. That's huge. What exactly does a climate hotspot mean?
So basically, these areas are highly vulnerable to the negative impacts of climate change. Increased fire risk, biodiversity loss, you name it.
So we've got agriculture, water, and forests all facing pretty serious climate-related problems.
Right.
What about the people? How is human health being impacted by all of this?
Well, Uttar Pradesh already faces certain vulnerabilities, low literacy rates, high poverty incidence, and a susceptibility to natural disasters like floods and earthquakes.
Okay.
Combine that with things like limited access to basic services and healthcare,
Right.
and you have a population that's particularly vulnerable to the health impacts of climate change.
Yeah, it's like existing inequalities are just being made worse by climate change.
Exactly. And the report actually gives some specific examples. They link rising temperatures to a surge in Japanese encephalitis in eastern Uttar Pradesh.
Oh, wow.
For every 1 degree Celsius increase, they saw a 22.23% rise in transmission of the disease.
Wow. That's crazy. It really highlights that direct connection between climate and health.
It really does.
All right, so it's a pretty bleak picture so far.
Yes.
But I'm hoping there's some good news. What kind of solutions are they proposing?
So the report proposes a really comprehensive action plan.
Okay.
It's built around 8 key missions, which cover everything from sustainable agriculture and water management to greening the state, energy efficiency, sustainable habitats, human health, disaster management, even strategic knowledge for development.
Wow, okay, that's a lot. It sounds really comprehensive. But I have to ask, is this just a wish list, or do they actually have, like, concrete strategies for achieving these goals?
No, they actually lay out specific strategies for each mission, and that's what makes this report so valuable. It's not just about setting goals, it's about actually figuring out how to achieve them.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive in. Starting with sustainable agriculture.
Okay.
What's their plan of attack there?
Under the Sustainable Agriculture Mission, they focus on promoting something called climate-smart agriculture.
Okay.
Think about things like drought-resistant crops, water-efficient irrigation, even using technology like weather forecasting to help farmers make better decisions.
Huh, that's really interesting. So they're trying to blend traditional practices with modern tech.
Exactly. And it's not just about technology. They also talk about the importance of training and support for farmers,
Okay.
including the role of farmer-producer organizations in sharing knowledge and best practices.
Like a very grassroots bottom-up approach.
Absolutely. And that theme of community engagement actually runs throughout the report.
Okay.
For example, in the Jal mission, which focuses on water resources,
Okay.
they talk about involving local communities in things like water management, promoting traditional water conservation techniques,
Okay.
rainwater harvesting, even reviving ancient water bodies like ponds and step wells.
You know, I've read about those traditional water harvesting systems in Rajasthan. It's fascinating how effective some of those ancient techniques can be.
It really is. It makes you wonder why we've moved away from some of these time-tested solutions.
It's like we're rediscovering the wisdom of our ancestors in the face of climate change.
Exactly.
What about the Green UP mission? What's their plan for greening the state?
So it goes beyond just planting trees.
Okay.
They're talking about restoring entire degraded forests, promoting something called agroforestry, even creating urban green spaces.
Okay.
It's about integrating nature into the fabric of the state, both rural and urban areas.
So it's not just about climate change. It's about improving the overall quality of life.
It is, and they're thinking about both the environmental and social benefits.
Okay.
They even talk about linking greening initiatives to livelihood opportunities for local communities.
Right.
Things like ecotourism, sustainable forestry, and even production of non-timber forest products. It's a win-win.
It is. It is. Okay, what about energy? What's their plan for kind of tackling that piece of the puzzle?
The Enhanced Energy Efficiency and Green Energy Mission recognizes the need to transition away from fossil fuels and move towards a more sustainable energy future.
Okay.
It's a multi-pronged approach, from promoting energy efficiency in buildings and industries to scaling up renewable energy production.
So are we talking like massive solar farms, wind turbines, that kind of thing?
Those are definitely part of it, but they also emphasize the importance of distributed renewable energy.
Oh, wow.
Like rooftop solar installations for homes and businesses.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a very localized approach to energy production.
Exactly. It's about empowering individuals to become producers of clean energy.
I like that. Okay, so it seems like they're really trying to tackle this from every angle.
They are.
But I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical. Where's all the money going to come from?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Well, we're going to dive into their funding strategy in more detail later. But I can tell you they've got a plan to leverage existing resources, explore external funding options, and even attract private sector investment.
Okay, well, color me intrigued. I'm looking forward to learning more about that.
Me too.
But for now, let's continue with these missions.
All right.
What's next on our list?
Let's talk about the Sustainable Habitat Mission.
Okay.
This one focuses on creating climate-resilient living spaces, both in urban and rural areas.
Right, because I imagine cities are particularly vulnerable to climate change.
They are. The report talks about things like urban heat islands, air pollution, and the fact that slums are disproportionately affected by climate impacts.
Right.
They're proposing to create more green spaces within cities, promote energy-efficient buildings, and develop more sustainable transportation systems.
Okay, so making cities more livable and resilient.
Exactly. What about rural communities?
Yeah, what's their plan for those areas?
So for rural communities, the focus is on strengthening resilience to climate impacts. Things like promoting sustainable agriculture, improving access to safe water and sanitation, and enhancing disaster preparedness.
So it's like they're really trying to tailor their approach to the specific needs of different communities.
They are. A one-size-fits-all solution doesn't really work here.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the human health mission.
Okay.
We've talked about the health risks. What are they proposing to do about them?
Well, they're emphasizing a very proactive approach.
Okay.
This means strengthening disease surveillance and response systems, developing early warning systems for climate-sensitive diseases, and making sure healthcare infrastructure is resilient to climate shocks.
So they're not just reacting to health crises as they happen, they're trying to anticipate them and prevent them.
Exactly. For example, they talk about mapping vulnerable populations and developing targeted interventions, particularly in areas that are prone to things like heat waves and flooding. They also want to train healthcare professionals to better recognize and treat climate-related illnesses.
So they're really equipping the healthcare system to deal with these new challenges.
They are. All right, now let's move on to disaster management.
Okay.
What's their strategy for mitigating the risks of these extreme weather events that seem to be happening more and more often?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is. So the disaster management mission focuses on strengthening institutional capacity for disaster risk reduction.
Okay.
This includes improving forecasting and early warning systems, and making sure that climate change is taken into account in all disaster management plans.
So being prepared, not just reacting after the fact.
Exactly. They talk about creating a climate hazard mapping system to identify areas that are vulnerable to various types of disasters. And then they can use that information to guide risk reduction efforts and develop those targeted early warning systems. They also want to strengthen community-based disaster preparedness programs and make sure that critical infrastructure is resilient to climate impacts.
So it's multifaceted.
It is.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about this strategic knowledge mission.
All right.
This one seems particularly important because it underpins everything else they're doing.
It does. It's the foundation. So it's about strengthening the UP Climate Change Authority, promoting research and development on climate change mitigation and adaptation, and establishing a robust monitoring and evaluation framework.
So it's like building the knowledge base, the expertise, and the systems needed to actually make informed decisions and track their progress.
Exactly. What are some of their research priorities?
Well, they talk about the need for vulnerability assessments.
Mm-hmm.
They want to develop climate models that are specific to Uttar Pradesh
Okay.
and figure out which adaptation and mitigation strategies are actually most effective.
Okay.
They also want to promote research on things like climate-smart agriculture,
Yeah.
water resource management, and those health impacts of climate change that we talked about earlier.
So it's like they're saying, we need to fully understand the problem before we can really effectively solve it. Absolutely. And the monitoring and evaluation framework is really crucial for ensuring that they're actually making a difference.
It's about accountability.
It is.
Yeah, okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
It's clear that they've put a lot of thought into this plan.
They have.
They're thinking holistically, they're engaging communities, they're using data to guide their actions. But I still have that nagging question.
I know what you're going to say.
Where is the money going to come from for all of this?
Don't worry, we'll get to that. We'll dive into the financing strategy in more detail in our next segment.
All right. I'm definitely interested to see how they plan to pay for all this.
I think you'll find it fascinating.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat.
Go up.
All right, see you in part 2.
You know, when I was reading through this report, one thing that really stood out to me was the emphasis on this multi-sectoral approach, right?
Right.
It's not just about like cutting emissions or adapting to like hotter temperatures. It's like they're trying to make climate resilience a part of everything the state does.
Well, it's like climate change is woven through every aspect of life in Uttar Pradesh.
Exactly.
From the farms to the cities. And, it's not just about saving the environment. It's about, protecting people's livelihoods, their health, their way of life.
You've got, and what's interesting is that while this plan is obviously specific to Uttar Pradesh,
Right.
it has implications way beyond that. It's like a case study almost,
Yeah.
and how interconnected these issues are and why we need such a comprehensive plan to really tackle them.
Yeah, I see that.
Oh.
Okay, so let's get into, the specifics of this action plan.
Okay.
What are some concrete examples of what they're actually proposing?
Okay, so let's take the Sustainable Agriculture Mission.
Okay.
They talk about promoting this thing called climate-smart agriculture,
Okay.
which includes things like drought-resistant crops,
Right.
water-efficient irrigation, even using technology like weather forecasting to
Yeah.
help farmers make better decisions.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's about giving farmers the tools and the knowledge they need to adapt to a changing climate.
It reminds me of that article we were looking at, the one about AI being used to predict crop yields.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like technology is going to play such a huge role in adapting to climate change.
It really will, especially in agriculture. But it's not just about fancy gadgets.
Right.
This plan also talks about training and support for farmers, particularly through these things called farmer-producer organizations.
Okay.
It's about empowering those local communities to really take ownership of the solutions.
So it's not just top-down, it's bottom-up as well.
Exactly. You need both.
Yeah.
And you see this blend of traditional knowledge and modern technology throughout the report.
Okay.
Like in the Joel mission.
Right.
They're not just talking about building new dams or pipelines.
Right.
They're talking about reviving traditional water conservation practices. It's interesting. Rainwater harvesting, even restoring these ancient water bodies like step wells.
I've read about those.
Yeah.
Those are amazing.
It's like, hey, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here.
Right.
Let's look to the past. Let's see what worked and adapt those techniques to the present.
I like that.
It's a pretty cool approach.
It is, and it's not just about the environment, They're talking about connecting these initiatives to livelihood opportunities.
Right.
Like, ecotourism or sustainable forestry.
It's about creating a win-win where protecting the environment also boosts the economy.
Right.
And this isn't just limited to rural areas.
Right.
Like the Green UP mission focuses on restoring forests, but also on creating green spaces in urban areas.
Right, because we need trees everywhere.
Exactly. We need nature everywhere.
Yeah.
And these urban green spaces, they have so many benefits. They reduce that urban heat island effect.
Right.
They improve air quality. They're good for people's mental health.
It's true.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about energy.
Okay.
What are some of the strategies that they're proposing in the Enhanced Energy Efficiency and Green Energy Mission?
So this is where it gets really interesting. They're talking about a pretty fundamental shift in how the state produces and consumes energy.
Okay.
We're talking energy-efficient buildings and industries,
Okay.
but also a big push for renewables, especially solar.
So, like, massive solar farms, I imagine.
Those are part of the plan, but they're also promoting things like rooftop solar installations
Interesting.
for homes and businesses.
Okay.
It's about decentralizing energy production, giving people the power to generate their own clean energy.
Oh, I love that idea.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But, let's be realistic.
Yeah.
This kind of energy transition it's going to take a lot of money.
It is. It is. So where's it going to come from?
Okay, so they estimate they're going to need over 112,000 crores over the next decade.
Wow. Okay.
But a big chunk of that, around 72%, can actually come from existing government budgets and schemes.
Okay. The remaining 28%, though, that's going to require some external funding.
Okay, so that's where things like those multilateral funding options and private sector investments come in.
Exactly. They're looking at the World Bank, the Green Climate Fund, even tapping into corporate social responsibility initiatives.
So it's like a diversified portfolio of funding sources.
Precisely.
Okay, so back to the missions.
All right.
What about the Sustainable Habitat Mission? What's their vision for creating these climate-resilient living spaces?
Okay, so they're taking this two-pronged approach,
Okay.
addressing both urban and rural challenges.
Okay.
In cities, it's about things like climate-resilient building designs, better waste management, and integrating climate change into urban planning.
Because cities they're really on the front lines, I think, of a lot of these climate impacts.
They are.
Yeah.
The report specifically mentions needing more green spaces to combat that urban heat island effect we talked about.
Right.
They also want to promote energy-efficient buildings, more
Right.
sustainable transport systems. Right, to reduce congestion and air pollution, all that.
Exactly. It's about making cities not just livable, but truly sustainable.
Yeah. What about rural areas? What are they thinking there?
So in rural areas, they focus on strengthening community resilience
Okay.
through sustainable agriculture, improving access to safe drinking water and sanitation,
Okay.
and of course, better disaster preparedness.
It's like they recognize that each community is different and needs its own solutions.
They do. A one-size-fits-all approach just isn't going to cut it.
Right. Okay, what about the health impacts? We talked about all those risks earlier.
Yeah.
What's their plan for addressing those?
The Human Health Mission takes a very proactive approach.
Okay.
They're focusing on strengthening disease surveillance,
Okay.
developing early warning systems for climate-sensitive diseases,
Okay.
and making sure that the healthcare infrastructure itself can handle climate shocks.
So it's not just about waiting for people to get sick. It's about trying to prevent those illnesses in the first place.
Precisely. They're talking about mapping those vulnerable populations we talked about
Right.
and developing these targeted interventions, especially in areas that are prone to things like heat waves and flooding.
Okay.
And they want to train healthcare professionals to better recognize and treat those climate-related illnesses.
Yeah, it's about equipping the healthcare system to deal with this, new reality.
Exactly.
All right, now on to disaster management.
Okay.
What's the strategy for dealing with these extreme weather events that seem to be happening more and more often these days?
It's a big one. So the disaster management mission is all about strengthening institutional capacity for disaster risk reduction.
Okay.
So that means improving things like forecasting and early warning systems
Okay.
and making sure that climate change is baked into all their disaster management plans.
So it's not just about reacting, it's about trying to get ahead of it.
Exactly. They talk about creating this climate hazard mapping system
Right.
to identify areas that are vulnerable to different types of disasters like floods and droughts and heat waves.
Okay.
And then they can use that information to create those targeted early warning systems and guide risk reduction efforts.
Okay.
And of course, they want to strengthen those community-based disaster preparedness programs.
Right.
And make sure that critical infrastructure can stand up to climate impacts.
So it's like a holistic approach combining technology,
Yeah.
community engagement, and infrastructure improvements.
You got it.
Okay. And finally, let's talk about the strategic knowledge mission.
All right, this is a big one.
This is the one that underpins all the others.
It does. It's kind of the brain of the operation.
Yeah.
It's about empowering that UP Climate Change Authority,
Okay.
promoting research and development on climate change mitigation and adaptation,
Right.
and establishing that strong monitoring and evaluation framework.
I'm really curious about the research piece. What are some of the things they're prioritizing?
So they want to do things like vulnerability assessments,
Okay.
develop these climate models that are specific to Uttar Pradesh,
Okay.
and figure out which adaptation and mitigation strategies are the most effective for that region.
Okay.
They're also pushing for research on things like climate-smart agriculture, water resource management, and health impacts we talked about.
So they're saying we need to really understand what we're dealing with before we can solve it.
Exactly. And that monitoring and evaluation framework, that's crucial for making sure they're actually making a difference.
It's about holding themselves accountable.
Absolutely. It's about setting targets, tracking their progress, and being willing to change course if they need to,
Right. Right.
so that the action plan stays relevant over time.
You know, it's interesting how much emphasis they're putting on knowledge and capacity building.
It is.
It's not just about the infrastructure.
Right.
It's about investing in people.
Yeah.
And giving them the ability to adapt to climate change.
Yeah. You've got it. You can have the best plan in the world, but if you don't have people who can implement it, it's not going to work.
Right. It's about empowering people to actually make the changes, not just be the recipients of top-down policies.
Well said. That's what makes this action plan so exciting. It's not just a bunch of bureaucracy. It's a real call to action for everyone to get involved in building a better future.
I'm really impressed with this plan, I have to say.
They too.
They're really looking at this from every angle.
They are.
And they're not shying away from the tough questions.
They're not.
But I am curious about one thing.
Okay.
How are they planning to actually measure the success of all this?
That is the question, isn't it? And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, okay.
We're going to look at the specific indicators and metrics they're using to track their progress
Okay.
and see if their actions are actually having the desired effect.
All right, I can't wait. Okay, so we've talked about the challenges that Uttar Pradesh is facing and the really ambitious strategies they've laid out in their climate action plan. But now I really want to get into, how do they actually measure success? How do they track their progress and make sure they're accountable?
It's one thing to have a plan, but it's a whole other thing to actually, see it through and make it happen.
Right.
And this report, it doesn't just stop at recommendations. It gets into the nitty-gritty of how they're going to measure impact.
I like that.
Yeah, it's like they anticipated our question.
Well, I'm all ears. Let's get into the data. What are they using?
So they've pulled data from the India Meteorological Department to analyze historical climate trends and project future scenarios for Uttar Pradesh.
Okay.
Specifically, they use those RCP scenarios, those representative concentration pathways.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah, to model different climate possibilities based on greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, those RCPs, they always paint a pretty stark picture depending on which emission pathway we end up on.
They do. This report focuses on RCP 4.5, which is kind of a moderate emissions scenario, and RCP 8.5, which is a high emissions scenario.
Okay.
And the projections for Uttar Pradesh under both of those are pretty significant.
All right, I'm ready. Hit me with the numbers. What are we looking at in terms of temperature and rainfall projections?
Okay, so they're projecting that the average annual maximum temperature could increase by anywhere from 1.7 to 2.2 degrees Celsius by the 2050s.
Okay.
And then by the 2080s, it could jump to between 2.3 and a whopping 4.3 degrees Celsius, depending on the emissions scenario.
A 4-degree increase. It's kind of hard to even imagine what that would mean for a place that's already experiencing hot temperatures.
It is. It's a big change. And then when you look at the rainfall projections, those are a little more complex because they vary by season and by region.
Right.
But generally, they suggest that Uttar Pradesh is likely to see less total annual rainfall.
Okay.
Especially during the monsoon season, which is really important.
Right.
And they're also projecting more variability in rainfall, so you're going to have those intense downpours followed by these long dry spells.
So it's not just less rain, it's also less predictable rain.
Exactly, which makes it even harder for agriculture to adapt.
Right. It's like one year you're dealing with drought and the next year you have floods.
It's a tough situation, and that's why those adaptive measures they're proposing are so important.
Right.
Things like those drought-resistant crops and better water management.
Okay, so they're not just looking at future projections, though, right? They're also using historical data.
They are.
To see how climate change is already affecting the state. What kind of insights are they getting from that?
Okay, so they're looking at all sorts of indicators to assess vulnerability in each sector.
Okay.
For example, in agriculture. They found that a lot of districts are highly vulnerable because they're so reliant on rain-fed farming.
Right.
They have limited irrigation, and a lot of them are very small farms.
It's really interesting to see it broken down like that by
Right.
district.
It is. It really helps them pinpoint those areas that are most at risk
Right.
and then target resources and interventions to where they're most needed.
So they can be more strategic with their efforts.
Exactly. And they're using that same approach, that data-driven approach, for the other sectors as well.
Okay.
Like in water resources,
Yeah.
they're highlighting that groundwater over-extraction issue, which we know is already a huge problem in Uttar Pradesh.
Right.
And the projections suggest that climate change is just going to make that worse. So there's going to be even more competition for water.
It's a scary thought.
It is. And then in forestry, the
Yeah.
report points to the rising risk of forest fires and invasive species,
Hmm.
both of which are linked to climate change, of course.
Right.
They really emphasize how important forests are, absorbing carbon dioxide. Yeah. The need to protect and restore those ecosystems.
It's like this domino effect.
It is.
Climate change impacts forests, which then impacts water resources, biodiversity, people's livelihood.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And then in human health,
Okay.
they highlight the increased risks of things like heat stress, vector-borne diseases,
Right.
waterborne illnesses. They even acknowledge that certain groups, like the elderly, children, and people living in poverty, are particularly vulnerable.
It's true. Climate change doesn't affect everyone equally.
It doesn't, and the report recognizes that,
Yeah.
stressing the need for targeted interventions to protect those who are most vulnerable.
Okay. And then there's the disaster management piece.
Right, so in the disaster management sector,
Okay.
the report really underscores the increasing frequency and intensity of those extreme weather events.
Right. The floods, the droughts, the heat waves.
Exactly. It's like Uttar Pradesh is being hit from all sides.
It kind of is, but even with all those challenges, it is really encouraging to see them taking this data-driven, proactive approach.
It's impressive they're not shying away from the hard realities, and they're really using data to guide their actions and track their progress. They're setting clear targets, monitoring indicators, constantly evaluating their strategies to make sure they're still on the right track.
It sounds like they're really committed to this, to being accountable and transparent.
They are. It's really refreshing to see a government taking climate action so seriously.
It is. And, while this plan focuses on Uttar Pradesh,
Right.
it really does offer valuable lessons for other places dealing with similar challenges.
Absolutely. It highlights how interconnected this all is, how we need these multi-sectoral approaches, and how important data is in really driving effective action.
It's a great reminder that climate action, it's not just some global idea.
Right.
It's a local necessity.
It is, and it's something we can all contribute to, whether it's through the choices we make, our community involvement, or even our professional work.
This deep dive into the Uttar Pradesh State Action Plan on climate change has been really eye-opening.
It has.
It's shown us, the really complex challenges ahead, but it's also, I think, given us a sense of hope.
It has.
That by working together, we can actually create a more sustainable and resilient future.
Well said. And to our listener, we encourage you to dive into this topic yourself.
Yes.
Explore the resources, find ways to get involved in climate action in your own community.
Exactly. Every little bit helps.
It does.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay curious.
I got milk.